We're back to Authors Corner on the Total Education Network, TotalTutor.net for more information. Twitter, Total Tutor, Neil S. Haley, Facebook, and it's the Miami Book Fair series of interviews. And I'm counting down to covering it live November 23rd and 24th. I mean, it's just going to be unbelievable. The authors all get to interview. But Lisa Palais at the Miami Book Fair just comes out and shocks me with who she brings on before the book fair. So I'm so excited to welcome the program New York Times best-selling author Soman Chainani, author of The School for Good and Evil. Soman, thanks for calling the program.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
I am absolutely blown away from your story. Just literally, I mean, it's so real to be so quickly a New York Times best-selling author. And what an awesome story. And I'm sure you're so excited to come to Miami.
No, it's been amazing. You know, Miami was where I sort of kicked off the tour for the first book. And then, you know, to get to come back a year later after it's been out and after, you know, everything that's happened with it, you know, and I'll be done with the second one by then. It's going to be sort of a surreal experience, you know.
So that's where you kicked it off. So basically, you didn't know that the success was going to be like this. You just probably had an idea. But when you started writing, did you ever think to yourself you'd be a New York Times best-selling author, and that this is going to be more than just a book?
No, I mean, at some level, you have a sense of, okay, this is a very big idea, you know. And I think sometimes when you have an idea, you know that it's more about, you know, finding an audience for it, or trying to tell a story that will connect to a certain group. This one, you know, when I had the idea, I was like, I know this is a big, sort of huge idea. So it was pressure, I felt like, because sometimes you have to live up to the potential of your own concept, you know. So, you know, I knew if I could just pull it off and actually deliver on the concept, it would have a good chance. But you never ever really believe any of this stuff's actually going to happen. You know, I still don't. I still haven't sort of
well. You know what happens with the story and how kids are into this and different things. You never know. You might be the next J.K. Rowling's, and I'll be saving your interview, saying, "Oh my gosh, I interviewed my biggest star and never knew it." But again, the story's fantastic. Again, for the School for Good and Evil, and tell us specifically, because that's what we're going to talk about, and then maybe you can also promote your second book. And I guess I'll have to shoot you an email after the Miami Book Fair to have you on for that one if you're launching it at the book fair. But I mean, the storyline is fantastic in so many ways, because it involves school, which I love being an educator, but ultimately the twists and plots are very interesting. So tell us about the two main characters and how they end up either at the School for Good or School for Evil.
Sure. I mean, the book sort of came from sort of my obsession with fairy tales and the fact that I grew up with Disney movies. And, you know, that's all sort of I watched because we didn't have cable or anything. And then when I got to college, I realized that those stories were all sort of, you know, bastardized versions of the original tales, you know. So I wanted to start with these two girls who almost had Disney-esque kind of mentalities. Sophie, who really believes that she's a princess. She's meant to be a princess because she's blonde and gorgeous and, you know, sort of belongs in this school for good where she'll graduate, you know, the perfect princess. And then a girl named Agatha, who everyone thinks is a witch because she is, you know, sort of goth and has a black cat and, you know, is super pale and sort of witch-like in her appearance. And sort of the story goes that when they're taken to the school and they're sort of taken over the school to be put in their respective towers, they get switched. And so Agatha, the witchy girl, ends up in the School for Good with all the future princes and princesses, and Sophie ends up sort of surrounded by all these horrible villains in the School for Evil.
And Soman, and what I think is really interesting in this story is basically the fact that it's a moral in a lot of ways, how we are placed as the most popular in the world, and before we know it, things will turn and will become ugly again. And the same thing that somebody who's considered the toad ends up with something really huge in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is to sort of deconstruct what we consider good. You know, like when kids look at the cover, their first question always is they don't understand why the blonde girl is in front of the School for Evil, you know, and they just accept, to me, they say it's a mistake. Like, they assume it's a mistake, that the artist just switched them. Like, you know, the idea of this perfect Disney princess being in the School for Evil just doesn't jive with their mentality, and I think that's just the way that they've been raised. The attractive kid usually is going to be the one who succeeds in the end, according to Disney at least.
What I think also is cool is, again, you bring fairy tales into this. And I think that in a way, and you said you were such a huge Disney fan, and how you're placing specific things by putting these characters in the story. It's going to surprise people that which side are they going to take? The school for good or school for evil? That's the big thing. You got to buy the book, but really, I think that, Soman, you're trying to make some changes, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think the main thing I wanted to have is that I wanted evil to have an equal chance to win. I feel like in kids' books, kids go in knowing the good character is going to win even subconsciously. And I think in this story, I wanted it to feel like a fair fight, that it was perfectly, acceptable to root for the villains, which is sort of a unique concept. And so that was my main thing, was write a book where you can root for the villains, and see what happens. And sort of that's the arc of the series, is to sort of destroy what good and evil mean sort of traditionally to kids.
Exactly, what good and evil mean. And so in a lot of ways, I think that there are so many things that people think of good. And like you said about the blonde hair and the princesses, everyone thinks that's great. And they end up being sometimes the most ugly people when we meet them.
Yeah. And absolutely. And I think the other thing is, to let kids understand that there's something beyond beauty. Like one of the things that Agatha goes through in the book is sort of, when she's in the school for good is, one day they sort of promise her a makeover, to become a princess. And when she's done with this makeover, she thinks that she's the most beautiful person in the world. Like her self-esteem grows. And then when she finally gets in front of the mirror, she realizes they haven't changed her at all. And I think it's that element too, that, it's more about the transformations you make inside versus the ones you make outside that actually help you feel like a princess or feel like the sort of Disney beauty that, everyone aspires to.
We're talking to author Soman Chainani, New York Times best-selling author, The School for Good and Evil. Again, the Miami Book Fair series, I can't believe 1 month till Miami. And when did you see that, kids really are taking to these characters? How long did it take you? How long did it take you to kind of spot this very quickly? Did you have a great PR that got it going to get the...
Well, we sold the movie the week of the release. So Universal bought the movie, and I'm writing it for them now at the moment. They're hoping for it to come out sometime in the next 2 years. So I think once the movie news was announced, because it was one of their biggest sort of deals in the last few years, for the book, like they really are sort of passionate about it. Then, slowly things started happening, and then you saw kids sending in stuff. And I think once kids started sending in stuff, I started realizing how insane it was getting. Because I was getting, pictures of... I was getting kids with, temporary tattoos they were making, and stickers, and fan art, and role-playing games, and one made sort of a weird... book-inspired fitness workout. Cakes. God, it was just so many things. Where it was just it was so amazing. They just sort of got into the world themselves, and it just made it in a way easier to write the second, because I realized how much they actually believed in the world, so I could go as deep as I wanted. Sometimes you always have that fear of going too deep into a world, but not in this case.
Well, and it's amazing, and you can't buy that kind of publicity. They buy buy the rights, and then you're going to write it, and then bam, before you know it, they help promote in a way, and it just goes like wildfire, and then the kids just flock to it. Have you been able to read the book at different schools and stuff, and visit other schools about this?
I went on a huge tour. I went on a 12-city tour all over the place. I went to England and did the UK release over there.
Oh,
so
wow.
I get to see how kids react to it and everything. I mean, it has a very, very sort of I don't know what the word would be, but maybe controversial twist ending, and it's that ending that's always fun when I go into schools, and half the kids have read it and half the kids haven't, and just sort of seeing sort of how excited the kids who've read it are by that ending, and how many questions they have about it. But I think I think for the first time when I go there and see them for the first time, these kids really just enjoy the fact that they get to read a book that doesn't follow the rules. It sort of does what it likes, and I think maybe that's really why it's caught on. because it didn't go through the librarians and the usual sort of route that it goes to get to the kids. In this case, the kids were the ones who found it. The kids are the ones that spread it. And in fact, I have parents write me all the time who say that, like, once the kid starts reading it, they won't let the parent read it because they tell the parent that the parent, A, wouldn't understand it, and B, wouldn't approve of it. So, and I feel like those are the two best things that a kid can say.
Exactly, and again, you put the whole process and thinking about the characters and then the cover of the book and all those things. You're really, what would you call yourself? What would you call your style? Would you say it's a Harry Potter-esque slash?
Maybe, but I think the thing with Harry, I'm a huge Harry Potter fan and love those books. But I think there's this innate safety to those books where you feel like good. You know what good is, and you know that things are going to be okay. In my school, you can't even trust the teachers.
I think the school's probably the only relationship, really.
Yeah, the schools, the classes, the fact that we go really deep into the way the school operates, I think. But otherwise, I think the main differences here are, one, this is a much more dangerous world, where it's always life or death, like even when you go into a class, And then the other issue is, I think, just having girls as the lead changes everything in a lot of ways, because you get much more into this book is so much less about magic and spells and the way of the workings of a world, and so much more about sort of the relationships girls have with each other and the relationships girls will have with boys. So it's much more about romance and friendship and sort of all the sort of like dangerous things that happen in adolescence and sort of between tweens also. So
the biggest challenge, Soman, that you're dealing with is the basic situation that having to write about girls, right? That's the challenge. Where do you get that background that you're able to think like girls in certain aspects, being a male writer?
I think girls, in a way, are easier than boys, just because I think girls are more freewheeling with their emotions, and they don't find this need to suppress them, and that becomes a sort of a big theme in the second book. When it becomes more about boys versus girls. But I think, I just sort of write them as boys in terms of their initiative and their desire to get into action, these sort of action moments. But I just let them speak their feelings. Whereas with boys, you're always covering. You're just constantly like covering. So I think it's easier. It honestly is much easier to write a girl because they're allowed to speak their mind.
Well, I'm going to have to book you on the show once you get back from Miami. I'm going to have to see when you have time, the big star that you're becoming, and I know it. I feel it. I know it's going to be, once the movie's out, you'll say, Neil who? But we're okay. I'm just telling you, I know this how this world is in specific ways, but I know you would never do that. You're down to earth, and I appreciate you taking the time. Now, first of all, where can our listeners and readers find more information on you? And also, what are you going to be doing at the Miami Book Fair? Do you have a certain signing you're going to be doing and all that stuff? So those
yeah. So they can learn more about the book at www.schoolforgoodandevil.com, which has everything about the book, including a cool sort of trailer that goes with it and more info about the movie and everything. And I'll be at the Miami Book Fair. I think I'm doing like almost 4 days of stuff there. I'm doing the 23rd and 24th, I'll be autographing and doing a talk at the Kids Alley. And then for 2 days, I'll be going around to local schools and talking to kids about the book. So I will definitely be around, and definitely on the 23rd and 24th at the fair.
Well, I'm going to be broadcasting from my cold studios in Pittsburgh while you'll enjoy the weather in Miami, but I appreciate you coming by, and I'm going to reach out specifically to your publicist and make sure we can set you up a couple, like probably in January, to have you back on to talk about the second book. So thanks for calling.
Perfect. I'd love to.
All right, take care now. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. All right. You're listening to Author's Corner, and we'll be back in just a moment.